Wyoming Territory, late December 1872. Snow fell like whispers that would not stop, and Colt Warren had been riding since before sunup, his horse's breath fogging thick in the freezing air. He spotted the shape just off the trail near the cottonwoods, barely more than a lump in the snow. At first, he thought it was a tarp or old bedroll tossed from a wagon. Then he saw the bare hand, pale against the ground, and the curl of something smaller tucked close. He swung down fast, boots crunching. Miss. No answer. Colt knelt, brushing snow off her shoulders. She was young, barely more than 20, maybe. Her hair was tangled, her face drawn tight and cold, lips blue at the edges. Her arms cradled a bundled baby, limp but breathing, cheeks red with cold. God Almighty, Colt muttered, already shrugging off his coat. The woman stirred with a soft groan as he laid the heavy sheepskin over her, tucking it tight around both her and the child. Ma'am, you need to wake up. His voice was firm but low. She blinked, tried to focus. Her lips moved. He's only 10 weeks. Save your strength. I got you. He gathered the bundled baby first, then her, lifting both into his arms. She was light as wind-dried wood. The horse snorted, nervous, but held steady as Colt mounted with them. His cabin sat 3 miles west, up a slope and past a frozen creek. The ride back was slow, the snow thickening, and Colt kept glancing down to make sure she was still breathing. By the time he pushed open the cabin door, both were nearly frozen through. He laid her gently on his bed, then moved to the hearth, grabbing kindling and logs, striking a match with shaking fingers. Flame caught and warmth spread quick. He moved fast blankets, water warming, the baby wrapped in one of his flannel shirts. She roused again when he pressed a tin cup to her lips. You're safe, he said. You're my home.
I'm Colt Warren.
What's your name? She looked at the baby, then back at him.
Selene.
Selene Rivers. That your boy? She nodded. His name's Liam. All right, Selene. You rest. I got you. She hesitated, eyes on his face like she was trying to figure out if she could believe him. But her body gave out before her mind decided, and she slipped back into sleep. By morning, her fever had broken. Colt had stayed up most of the night feeding the fire, checking the baby, making sure she kept breathing. He had not slept, but he felt more awake than he had in years. Selene stirred, eyes fluttering open. She looked toward the bed's edge, where Liam lay swaddled and full-bellied in a basket Colt had padded with wool. You stayed, she whispered. I said I got you, Colt said simply. She sat up slow, trembling. I did not mean to be out there. I thought I could make it to town. My horse broke its leg, and I had to walk. Then the cold came fast. Well, you made it here instead. That was enough. Selene looked around the cabin, small but solid, clean, the wood stove ticking quietly. She pulled Colt's coat tighter around her shoulders. You gave me your coat, she said, voice cracking. Could not leave you there. Liam made a soft sound, and she leaned forward, face softening as she picked him up. Colt watched her, something thick pressing in his chest. You got family? He asked. She shook her head. Not anymore. I was married. He died in September. Fever. The farm went under fast. I sold what I could, packed what I had left, and tried to get to my cousin in Rawlins. She never showed up to meet me. Colt leaned against the table, arms crossed. So you and Liam are alone. Selene looked up at him. Seems that way. He nodded.
Well,
you are not alone now. She blinked, surprised. What do you mean? I mean, this is not charity. You're not being tossed back out in the snow. You and Liam stay here until you figure what you want next. Her eyes filled, but she blinked them dry. That is kind, but I do not take handouts. It is not a handout. It is an offer. You want to work to earn your keep, fine. But you and that boy are not going back out in the cold. Liam let out a tiny yawn, his fingers wrapping around Selene's thumb. She looked down at her son, then back at Colt. You do not even know me. I know enough, Colt said. I know you kept that baby alive in the middle of a snowstorm. That is something. Selene exhaled, slow and shaky. All right. We will stay. For now.
Colt nodded. Good.
The next few days passed quiet and steady. Colt brought in wood, checked the traps, and made sure the horse stayed fed. Selene helped where she could, washing dishes, mending a pair of his shirts, even stirring stew one night with Liam strapped to her chest. They did not talk much, but when they did, it felt solid. On the 5th morning, Selene stood on the porch, wrapped in one of Colt's heavier coats. Snow still blanketed the land, but the sun was out, and the sky had that sharp blue calm of deep winter. Colt stepped outside, mug of coffee in hand. You sleep all right? He asked. Better than I have in months, she said. Liam was nestled against her, sleeping soundly. She turned to face Colt. I keep thinking about that night. How close we were to not making it. He looked at her gently. But you did. You are here. She nodded. Because of you. They stood in silence for a long while, the wind brushing past. Finally, Selene looked up. Why did you do it, Colt? Why stop for a stranger? Why carry us all the way here? He met her eyes. Because someone should have. And because I wanted to. Selene's lips parted slightly, her breath clouding in the cold. Inside, Liam fussed softly. She turned, stepping back into the warmth of the cabin. Colt followed, shutting the door behind them. Selene adjusted Liam in her arms. I do not want to leave anymore, she said. Colt froze. You do not. She looked over, steady.
No.
I want to stay. If you still mean what you said. He stepped closer. I meant it. Their eyes held for a long moment. Something shifted in the air between them like ice breaking, like spring on the edge of the world. Selene smiled, soft and real. Then we are home. Colt's axe came down clean through the log, the sound cracking sharp across the yard. He straightened, breath clouding in the morning chill, and cast a glance toward the cabin window. The curtain fluttered, and he caught a glimpse of Selene's profile in the glass, her hair pinned up. Liam balanced on her hip as she rocked him to calm. She'd taken to the rhythm of the place faster than he'd expected. Each day, she moved a little steadier. Her hands no longer shook when she carried a kettle. Her voice had lost the edge of strain when she sang to the baby, just low enough not to wake him. She'd even started asking questions about the land where the deer moved in winter, how deep the creek ran come thaw. He laid the split wood on the stack beside the cabin and wiped his palms on his trousers. When he stepped back inside, he felt the warmth like a hand across his chest, thick with stew, pine smoke, and something gentler. Selene looked up from the table where she was stitching a torn feed sack into something resembling a sling. Liam slept in the cradle Colt had carved the year he built the place, back when he'd thought he'd need it for a family that never came. You ever trap beaver? She asked, threading her needle again. Sometimes, Colt said, hanging his coat by the door. Not as much as I used to. Markets dropped off some. She nodded, lips pressed tight in thought. You think the pelts still fetch enough to trade for flour? Maybe. You thinking of riding out?
No.
I'm thinking of staying useful. Colt filled the kettle and set it on the stove. You already are. Selene looked at him, then down at her work. I don't want to owe you. His voice came quiet but firm. You don't. She didn't answer, just kept stitching. The silence was comfortable, full of things that didn't need saying. Later that afternoon, Colt led her out behind the barn, where the snow had drifted deep against the fence. The sky hung low, and the wind had picked up, pushing sharp against their cheeks. There's a spring down past that ridge, he said, pointing. When it warms up, I'll show you how it feeds the pasture. Selene pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. This land, it's yours outright. Paid for it in labor once the war ended. Took 5 years. She looked out over the frozen slope, the cottonwoods bare and quiet. You built all this alone? Mostly. He paused. Had a brother once. Helped with the roof and the fencing. He left for Utah. Never came back. Selene's gaze turned to him. You ever think about leaving?
No.
I came through too much to claim it. Feels wrong to turn from it now. She tilted her head. You always this steady? Colt gave a dry laugh. Only when someone's watching. She smiled, just a flicker, and turned toward the cabin. Come spring, I could plant beans along that south wall. If you've got seed.
Ido.
And I know how to smoke fish if we can get some from the creek.
Colt nodded.
Sounds like a plan. She looked back, her expression unreadable. You seem surprised. I ain't used to someone planning with me. Selene's voice dropped. I didn't think I'd be planning anything again. Not after. Well. Colt didn't press. He just stepped beside her, boots crunching in the snow. You want to plant beans here, he said after a pause. You should. She studied his face, the quiet way he stood, not asking for anything but not walking away either. I meant what I said the other day, she said. I don't want to leave. I meant it too. She glanced down, then back up again. Then let's make something of it. Colt nodded once. We already are. They turned back toward the cabin together. The wind carried the faint cry of Liam waking, and Selene moved quicker, her boots finding steady purchase in the snow. Inside, the fire burned warm as ever. Liam fussed until he felt his mother's arms again, then quieted with a sigh. Colt stood at the door a moment longer, watching her rock him, her hand cupping the back of his tiny head. Selene looked over her shoulder. You coming in? Yeah, he said. I'm coming. The thaw came slow that year, first in the sound of dripping from the eaves, then in the soft give of earth beneath the snow. By early March, the creek had started to run again, and the cabin's chimney let up thinner smoke. Colt cleared the path to the well, one boot step at a time, while Selene stood at the edge of the porch with Liam on her hip, his round face tucked into her shawl. Water's clean again, Colt said, lifting the bucket and wiping a fleck of mud from his hand. You can draw from it now without boiling. Selene stepped down, careful of the slick stone. I'll still boil it, just to be sure. Fair enough. She dipped a ladle in, tasted it, then gave a small nod. You were right. Clean as anything. Colt didn't answer, just watched her as she turned back toward the cabin, the baby's bonnet tilting as he stirred in her arms. That evening, she stood at the hearth, sleeves rolled, slicing dried apples into a pot. Colt sat by the window, whittling a new spoon from a length of aspen, not because they needed it, but because his hands liked being busy when his thoughts wandered. Tell me something, Selene said, not looking up. All right. Why'd you never marry? Colt set the knife down and leaned back. Didn't seem the kind of man someone want to follow out here. You're steady. You keep your word. You built something with your own hands. Seems like the kind of man most women would trust. He let out a low breath. Maybe I didn't want just anyone trusting me. Maybe I was waiting for someone who'd mean it. Selene stirred the pot, her back still to him. You think maybe she's already here? He stood slowly, crossed to her side. I do. She looked up at him then, her eyes quiet and sure. So do I. They didn't touch, not yet. But something passed between them, solid and warm as the fire beside them. The next morning, Colt showed her how to mend the fence line along the southern edge, where the posts had sunk from frost. She carried Liam in a wrap across her front, his head nestled close, while Colt tamped earth around the new stakes. They worked in rhythm without needing to speak. Midday, Selene wiped her brow with her sleeve and said, There's a strength in quiet. Colt glanced over. What do you mean? Most men I knew before talked and talked, like they were trying to fill something up. You don't need to. He nodded once. Words don't mend fence posts. No, she said, half smiling. But they can mend people. He looked at her long, then said, You've been mending me every day since you came. That night, after Liam had gone down easy, Selene sat on the edge of Colt's bed, running her fingers over a quilt square she hadn't noticed before. It was stitched with faded calico and coarse wool, the seams slightly uneven. My mother made that, Colt said from the doorway. Sent it with my brother years ago. He left it behind. Selene smoothed the edge. Feels like it was waiting for someone to use it. He crossed the room, sat beside her. Maybe it was. She turned her face toward him, eyes soft in the lamplight. You think this is where I'm meant to be?
He didn't hesitate.
I know it. Selene reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Then I'm done looking. The wind shifted outside, brushing against the walls like a lullaby. Inside, they sat still and close, the quiet wrapping around them. For the first time in a long while, there was nothing either of them needed to run from. Only what was unfolding, slow and certain, like spring after too many winters. By early April, the sod softened enough for planting. Colt watched Selene kneel in the dark soil with Liam swaddled snug on her back, his tiny fists tucked beneath his chin. She moved with quiet precision, fingers pressing bean seeds into the ground one by one, her brow furrowed in thought. She hadn't asked for help, so he didn't offer it, just stood nearby splitting seed potatoes in the shade of the shed, letting the quiet stretch between them like an unbroken thread. She stood after a while, rubbing her lower back with one hand. There's more room than I thought. South side gets the best sun, Colt said. Ground's soft there come spring. Selene glanced toward the tree line. I want to try squash along the fence later. I'll save seed from the ones you've got stored. Colt nodded. You've got a good eye for the land. I didn't before. She brushed soil from her palms. I was raised in town. My husband taught me what he could, but we didn't last long enough to see a harvest. He set the knife down. You never said where you were from. Council Bluffs. My father was a blacksmith. Never wanted me near the forge, though. Said heat makes a woman coarse. Colt smiled faintly. You're tougher than any blacksmith I ever met. She gave a soft laugh and bent to gather her basket. Toughness doesn't mean much if you've got nowhere to put it. He stepped closer. You've got somewhere now. Selene held his gaze. I know. That night, after Liam had gone down under a quilt she'd stitched from salvaged cloth, Colt brought out a cedar box from the trunk beneath his bed. He set it on the table without a word, then opened it to reveal a set of hand-drawn maps, yellowed with age. I've been charting the land since I settled, he said. Creek lines, game trails, where the frost lingers longest. Selene leaned over, eyes scanning the ink. You drew these?
Had to.
Territory maps are too wide. These are just for the 100 acres around us. She traced a finger along a ridge marked in faded pencil. What's this one? High Bluff. Gets wind early. Good lookout spot when you need to think. Ever take anyone up there? No, she didn't ask why. She just folded the corner of the map gently and said, You'll show me sometime? I will. The next morning, they packed a lunch and wrapped Liam in a wool blanket lined with rabbit fur. Colt led the way on foot, the trail narrow and climbing. Selene kept close behind, her boots finding steady purchase. At the summit, the land unfurled below them, fields still waking from winter, the creek flashing silver beneath bare cottonwoods, and the cabin small but solid in the distance. Selene stood quiet for a long time, Liam pressed warm against her chest as he stirred in sleep. I was afraid, she said finally, the night you found me, not just of dying, of being seen. Colt rested his hands on his hips, looking out. You were more than seen. You were carried. She turned toward him. Why do you trust me so easily? Colt didn't look away. Because you never asked me to. You just stayed. That told me enough. Selene stepped closer, her voice low. I don't know what comes next, but I wanted to come here. He reached out, brushing a wind-loosened strand of hair from her cheek. Then it will. Liam stirred, letting out a soft cry, and Selene rocked him gently, her eyes never leaving Colt's. I didn't think I'd ever have another home, she said. You do now, he answered. They stood together as the sun reached its peak, warming the bluff, the wind picking up just enough to lift Liam's blanket edge and send a swirl of dust down the trail. Selene turned into Colt's chest, letting his arms come around her, the baby nestled safe between them. Below, the land waited patiently for their return. Above, the sky had turned a deeper blue, the kind that meant spring had truly come. The first rain came in late April, soft and steady, falling over the roof shingles and pooling in the grooves of the yard. Colt leaned against the doorframe, watching Selene kneel beside the hearth, gently rocking Liam, who had grown heavier in the weeks since the snow melted. His eyes had turned the same quiet gray as the skies that morning. I've been thinking, Selene said, not looking up, about what to do with the north shed. It's dry inside, and it gets decent light from the eaves. Could be a place for a good root cellar, or even a loom, someday. Colt crossed the room slowly and crouched beside her. You know how to weave? I helped a neighbor when I was younger. Her husband was a wheelwright. She'd taken wool, trade cloth for milk or eggs. Said good hands could keep a household warm without a single coin ever changing hands. He smiled without showing teeth. Sounds like the kind of wisdom that ought to live here. I'd like to have something that's mine, she said gently. Not just borrowed space in someone else's story. Colt reached for her hand, resting it in his palm. This isn't borrowed. You're written into it now, same as me. She studied his face. You sure? I've never been sure of anything. Liam stirred, his small arms stretching in his sleep. Selene stood, laying him in the cedar cradle beside the hearth, her hands lingering on the edge. When she turned, Colt was still there, steady as a fence post, eyes on her like she'd never been a question. That night, while rain tapped soft against the roof, Colt brought out a tin box from the shelf above the mantel. Inside were a pair of silver rings, dulled by time, but still intact. He set them on the table without a word. My mother wore the smaller one, he said. My father carried the other in his pocket after she passed. Selene looked between them. You kept them all this time? I figured I might need them, if the right woman ever came. She touched the edge of the smaller band. These aren't new. Neither are we, he said quietly. But I think that makes us stronger. She didn't answer right away. Then she lifted the smaller ring and slid it onto her finger, slow and certain. Colt watched her, his voice low. You don't need a preacher to know something is true. But if you want one, I'll ride to town come morning. Selene stepped close, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't need anyone else to tell me what I already know. They stood in the hush of the room, the fire settling low, and outside the rain kept falling like a lullaby meant only for them. By July, the beans reached Selene's knees. The squash vines climbed steadily along the fence, and the hens she'd bartered from a passing peddler scratched contentedly in the yard. Liam had learned to sit up on his own, his laugh bright enough to chase off clouds. Colt built her a loom in the north shed, just like she'd hoped. It wasn't perfect, but Selene said it would do just fine. She began spinning old wool from the barn store, her hands moving with quiet purpose. They cleared a small plot behind the cabin for herbs yarrow, chamomile, bee balm, all grown from traded seed and careful tending. Selene showed Colt how to dry the leaves in bundles and hang them from the rafters. One warm evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, she knelt in the grass with Liam beside her, showing him how to press his hand into the soil. "He won't remember this," Colt said, crouching beside them. "No," Selene answered, "but I will. And that's enough." Colt reached for her, his hand brushing the small of her back, and for a moment the world felt untouched by hardship. Just air and light, and the three of them, exactly where they were meant to be. That winter, they kept the cradle near the stove, and Selene wove a blanket from the wool Colt sheared himself. When the snow fell again, it didn't feel like an ending, just part of the rhythm they had learned together. They passed the evenings with her spinning and him carving, Liam crawling between them, his laughter soft under the sound of the fire. The day they finally spoke vows was quiet. No crowd, no preacher, just the wind and the trees, and a single promise spoken between two people who had already weathered the worst. Colt tied a length of blue ribbon around her wrist, and she kissed his calloused palm like it was made of something sacred. Years passed, marked by harvests and new rows planted, by Liam's first steps across the kitchen floor, by Selene's loom growing quieter as her hands turned more and more toward the earth. They built a second room onto the cabin and a shed for tools. They didn't speak often of the lives they had before, not because they'd forgotten, but because what they had now was enough. Colt never stopped watching her the way he had that first spring, like she was the first heat after a long freeze. Selene never stopped reaching for his hand when the wind rose, knowing she'd never have to walk through another storm alone. And when Liam ran through the door one morning, cheeks flushed, holding out a bluebird's feather in a small fist, Selene looked at Colt with a smile that held their whole life inside it. They never left the land. They didn't have to. They had already come home.